Hello and welcome to Political Thinking. What is the plan for what the diplomats call the day after fighting in Gaza stops? Because surely one day it must stop. Keir Starmer's answer to that is clear. The Palestinian people, he says, must be given a credible, irreversible pathway to a Palestinian state, with both Gaza and the West Bank administered at first, at least, by the Palestinian Authority, which currently runs the West Bank and for years has been the sworn enemy of Hamas, who have run Gaza. My guest on Political Thinking this week is the head of mission for the Palestinian Authority here in the UK, Husam Zomlot. He was born in Gaza. He's spoken of his grief at losing members of his family there. He served as a diplomat, not just here, but in the United States. Husam Zomlot, welcome to Political Thinking.
Thank you, Nick.
This is quite a significant week. We have seen a ceasefire in Lebanon. Do you see that as a sign of hope, that there could be another ceasefire to come, or a warning that Israel will now focus yet more of its firepower on the people of Gaza?
Well, I do see it as a source of hope. So does the rest of the world, I think. Everybody who was involved in that process of negotiation and diplomacy now doubles down on the belief that diplomacy works. And look, it works. We have a ceasefire. Our security issues have been resolved, and now we look out at political and diplomatic resolutions. But that's you and I and the rest of the world. But there is one person missing in this calculation, that is Netanyahu, which he might go exactly for the second option, which is now we single Gaza out. We put all of our military and capacity might to continue the mass murder, the mass destruction, and the mass expulsion of Gaza by the use of starvation and the use of disease as weapons of war, especially in light of the utter silence and impotence of the international system and the international community to stop him. So we are literally standing at an edge of where things would go from here. Let's hope it would be the lesson that only diplomacy can work. And Netanyahu would have gotten his hostages out already by March and April. There were many, as you know very well, diplomatic formulas, agreements offered by him, and he has refused. Let's hope Lebanon will give an incentive in the direction of diplomacy.
We're going to speak much more about the Prime Minister of Israel, about whether a deal can be done with him, what the future might hold. But we want to focus particularly on your story, your experiences. Now, look, you've spent a life as a Palestinian student activist, as an administrator, as a diplomat, in this extraordinarily difficult, painful 13 months or so. Has it been difficult to hold on to hope?
No, it's the only thing that I can hold to and must hold to is hope. If I lose it, I will not wake up in the morning. The thing that keeps me going is hope, not optimism. Hope. There's a difference between both.
You were born in Gaza. You were born in the city of Rafah in the south of Gaza that's become so famous in recent months. And you were born there because of what Palestinians call the Nakba. Now, it's a phrase many people know, but a lot of people find puzzling. What is that story?
It is the story of a people who have gone through first cancellation, complete cancellation. And by the way, the UK, Britain had something to do with that cancellation process, the Balfour Declaration. We were completely cancelled as a nation. And then there came an ideology that Palestine is a land without a people. And for that ideology to materialize, acts of extermination has to be implemented against my people. And in 1947-48, the Nakba year, militias, Jewish militias, engaged in ethnic cleansing campaign, whereby 2/3 of the Palestinian people were violently forced out. That was my parents, my grandparents, and as a result, I am the son of the Nakba. I was born in a refugee camp in Rafah.
So this is the moment at which the State of Israel is created. Your family grew up, what, northeast, a few miles northeast of Gaza's borders?
Yes. No, I was born exactly at the Rafah border, and there is a story why. I was born there because my grandfather, with my father, when they were forced out of their homes, farms, livelihoods in the village of Simsim to the north of Gaza.
And he took you back to that place, didn't he, even as a young boy?
Yes, I was
and said what?
6, 7 years. My grandfather took me, my father, was driving, my grandfather, and then he said, Husam, come on board. I am the eldest of the... I went, we drove for 40 minutes. And my grandfather told me, this is your home. This is my home. This is where I was born. This is where your father was born. This is Simsim. Next to us is Herbia. Next to all the villages. He mentioned all the way to Yibna. Anyway, he gave me the geographic sort of landscape. And then I said, okay, where is exactly your home? He was looking, until he identified by a fig tree, because he planted that fig tree. And then I said, okay, my grandfather, why aren't we living here? It took us 40 minutes to drive from the refugee camps to his home. And my father was unable to answer me at that time because he wanted to shield me from the horror he's gone through.
He didn't talk to you about the politics? He didn't say to you?
At the time, he didn't mention. I grew up until I was maybe 14, completely by my society, isolated, insulated from the political, because I think, not only me, I think I speak on behalf of the entire generation, the parents and the grandparents wanted us to inherit the narrative, the culture, the identity, but not the bitterness.
Not the rage.
Not the rage, not the anger, not the hatred.
When did he tell you? And what did he tell you?
Well, it was up until later when the first Intifada erupted. And at that time, I was 13 years old.
So the Intifada is the phrase always used for effectively an uprising,
yes,
street uprising, what, the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s?
Popular people's uprising against injustice. Up until then, I would see the blue flag, the UN flag, all over us, outside our home, on our school, in the clinic. So up until then, I was confused. I thought the UN flag was my flag. The refugee camp, really, it's a very interesting experience because you grew up literally in a communal situation whereby, and I once said, and it became quoted everywhere, that as if one mother is not enough, I had 20 mothers.
I'm getting a picture here, a picture of this wider family in the refugee camp, a picture of the UN seeming to be your saviour, in some ways your friends, the people who work for the UN. And yet when the Intifada comes along at the end of the 80s, you become, don't you, an angry young man. I mean, you're at university, you become a student activist for Yasser Arafat's faction, Fatah in the PLO. At that stage, I mean, is angry the right word? Is hatred the right word?
Rejection and resentment. I'll tell you with all honesty, the generation that has gone through the Nakba has made sure that we do not have rage and hatred, but we had resentment. So I grew up, of course, until I got to 13 years old, 12 years old, and I started becoming much more, in a way, aware of the reality, of the oppression, of the collective oppression. Now, by the first Intifada, the first real experience came to me when my school went out in protest. It was popular. Intifada is popular, non-violent, non-armed resistance by people, by ordinary people, students, women, what have you. So I went out with the school in a march. It was a peaceful march. Now, the Israeli army that I was watching as a small little child all the way, that vulgar, unwelcomed, odd thing, I saw their action for the first time. Right directly, they started shooting at the demo. 6 were killed instantly. I saw some of them. Some of them are children. And that was the first shock. And then I ran for my life. I am a bit tall, taller than my average, so they ran after me.
This is what forms you. You go on one route. You, along with Yasser Arafat, go on the route of saying the PLO, banned in Israel for years, seen as a terrorist organisation, took a route of recognising the state of Israel until that extraordinary moment at which Yasser Arafat is actually on the steps of the White House with Bill Clinton, doing a deal with the Israelis. But you must have had many people of your generation, people you knew in Rafah, who took another view. When you say there's no anger, there's no hatred for children of the Nakba, forgive me, but there obviously is. That's what we saw on October the 7th. Did you know people in that era who said, no, you're getting this horribly wrong, Husam. Far from doing a deal with these guys, we should keep up the armed struggle?
The armed struggle that was picked by Yasser Arafat first, and by the national movement, by the PLO, or negotiation as a strategy, or popular resistance, Intifada, as a strategy, is a strategy, but what unites us as the Palestinians is the goal. And the goal is very clear. Our goal is the love of our country and our people. That's the goal. We are not motivated by the hate of. We are motivated by the love of. And I think I speak on behalf of most Palestinians, if not all. The only difference is a strategy. Every Palestinian agrees on the goal.
But you see, there is a difficulty, isn't it, talking of violence as a strategy? Because isn't part of the explanation for the gulf in the way different people see what's happened since October the 7th about language? If you're an Israeli, if you're a sympathiser with Israel, you will often see what happened on October the 7th as the worst atrocity since the Holocaust, as peace campaigners being raped and murdered and burned in their own home, as old people, sick people, babies murdered or taken hostage. You won't see that as a blow against the Israeli state or the Israeli army. It's anti-Semitism is what it looks like to many, many people. And yet you're far from an apologist for Hamas. I mean, you represent a completely different strand of politics. But in the aftermath of October the 7th, you did say, look, you've got to see it in a context. You've got to see this was coming. The Israelis were warned this was coming. We told them it was coming. And to some ears, that sounds like making an excuse.
Listen, Nick, our commitment to international legality is very clear. And I'm sure you've been following not only mine, but the institution I represent, the people I represent, the PLO. And Hamas is not part of the PLO, as you know very well. But Hamas is part of the Palestinian people, part of the Palestinian national and social fabric. We did not import them. And therefore, in the end, Hamas is an internal issue that can only be dealt with via the Palestinian people and via a democratic process. Let the Palestinian people decide.
Can you really argue that Hamas is simply something that is up to the Palestinian people to decide what to deal with? I mean,
it is.
Many countries regard it as a terrorist organisation. Well, it's not hard to dispute that the acts carried out were acts of terrorism on October the 7th.
Well, there is just war and there is justice in war. The war against, the resistance against a military colonial apartheid occupation is a just war. Ask the French when the Nazi Germany were there, unless you don't think the Germans did have a right to defend themselves. Or the Algerians against the French themselves before that, or after that, actually. So the concept of a just war is there. The issue here is justice in war, which means the rules that we should adhere to. And of course, we are absolutely and adamantly clear that targeting civilians is unacceptable, rejected nationally, faith-wise, and what have you.
I'm clear, and you're clear, that what you're saying is effectively Hamas broke the rules of war then. Let me ask you the question I asked the Israeli ambassador when she was in that
but
seat.
Does that, Dick, does that justify what Israel did since the 7th of October?
That's a different point. That's
the point.
Yeah, but I asked her,
let me ask you,
I asked her whether she, as a mother, dwelt on the deaths in Gaza and indeed in Lebanon. And you, like her, are a parent. You have 3 young children, I think. Are you able to empathise with the families of those who were killed and taken hostage on October the 7th?
I empathise with every family, of course. And I empathise, but I also empathise with your children. You have 3 as well. I have 3. By the way, you have 2 boys and 1 girl. I have 2 boys and 1 girl, Nick. And what I want for my 2 boys and 1 girl is exactly what you want. And what any other father wants. Of course, we want the same.
Let's move on, though, to what happens now. You made clear right from the beginning that your fear is that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, that people in his government want to commit another Nakba. Let's just spell that out before we talk about the international politics of this. Your fear is that far from wanting a ceasefire in Gaza, that they wish to evacuate, to forcibly evacuate, to ethnically cleanse, some people would call it, the Palestinian people from Gaza. Is that your belief?
Yes, that's not just my fear. They are doing it. Many people are saying, oh, look at Israel. They don't have a plan. They have no goals. They have failed to achieve any of their goals, including the hostages. They didn't get it. Anyway, I disagree. Israel has a plan. And their hostages is not part of the plan. The plan is to depopulate Gaza. And by the way, they will turn to the West Bank very soon. And you've heard Smotrich, the finance minister, only last week saying that 2025, which is few weeks ago, they will annex the West Bank.
I want to talk to you about how diplomacy might find a route out of that. But before I do...
No, let me confirm.
Let me just put this point to you, Husam Zomlot.
They are after the erasure of the Palestinian people.
I hear you.
Everywhere. By deeds, not words.
Well, let me put to you that they're not in favour of depopulating the Palestinian people. They do want to get rid of Hamas. And when they hear you, someone who doesn't agree with Hamas, someone whose life is committed to a two-state solution, say, well, Hamas are part of the Palestinian people. It's up to us to deal with it. They might say, well, look, there's the problem.
Yeah,
there's terrible terrorist acts is being committed, they say. And you guys want to say, well, just leave it to us to deal with it. Well, you haven't dealt with it.
Well, then you tell me, then we have to take all the kahanist out of the Israeli society. And I want to see senior ministers in the cabinet now being evicted somewhere or being prosecuted somewhere.
These are moral equivalents in your mind.
No, there is no equivalence, because Smotrich represents a colonial occupation, a besiegement and apartheid, and Smotrich is a state actor.
He's
and
worse
Netanyahu
than Hamas.
is a state, much worse than Hamas. And you want to draw moral equivalence between the occupied and the occupier, the colonizer and the colonizer, the besieger and the besieger. I'm sorry, this business has to end.
Well,
you cannot draw any equivalence.
I'm not drawing an equivalence. I'm asking you questions.
Is an official war criminal. That's what he is. So is Netanyahu and Gallant and the rest of them.
Netanyahu have been sent to the
Unless you don't respect the ICC.
Well, again, they haven't drawn a conclusion.
Come on, Nick. What's wrong with you and conclusions?
Look, I interviewed the prosecutor for the International Criminal Court in that, well, not that chair, a different chair for political thinking.
They issued arrest warrants.
They issued the arrest warrants. They have not been arrested. They have not been put on trial. When they are, people will know.
You need to help us, Nick, to get them arrested.
The British government now says that it would respect the arrest warrant, unlike the past British government, unlike the French government, unlike the American government.
We welcome that, officially.
How significant is it?
It's very significant.
That Keir Starmer's government says
it's very significant.
It would be prepared to
First, we have a Labour
people.
government with sets of values and a base that we know have a certain way of looking at the international arena, believing in internationalism and universal values. Second, we have a human rights lawyer sitting at the helm of the government, Sir Keir Starmer. The Foreign Secretary is a lawyer himself.
And they've said a lot of things that I think you will find attractive, not just that they would comply with that arrest warrant of the ICC. They say it's their legal obligation to do so, but also that they would recognise Palestine as a state. Many countries do, but Britain currently doesn't, along with quite a few other countries. And indeed that they want the Palestinian Authority to be involved in the rebuilding of Gaza after the war. Bigger question for you. Does it matter what Britain thinks? Does any of this that you do in your daily life, Husam Zomlot, as the head of mission for the Palestinian Authority, does it make any difference?
Of course. This is the moment for Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, and for the UK to really take its leading position in the international system. The UK is also a pinholder of international diplomacy, very well respected. You have one of the best civil servants there is in the world, and you have a permanent seat in the Security Council. Don't underestimate the power you have. And with the situation in the US, and please don't ask me that much on the US, with the situation in other major European countries such as Germany and even France, the UK stands out as a key player.
Now, you said don't ask you about America, which means I'm going to ask you about America.
No, please, but
I want to ask you about America.
About the F-35.
You've done
Just
quite
one
a lot.
sentence.
You've
One
done quite a
sentence.
lot of controlling of this interview, so it's my turn now. So, Husam Zomlot, let's turn to America, because you know it well. You were there in the first Trump term. You were head of mission for the Palestinian Liberation Organization in Washington, D.C. You know Donald Trump. You've met him.
I did.
So, can you do business with him?
Well, there is a lot of focus on Trump as a person, and many are just, focusing on his ego, his personality, all that, and that, some say that he likes to make deals, and he said that in a book of his own. And we went in the first time. I was sent an ambassador to Washington to utilize that possible opportunity. But there is also not only Trump, there is Trumpism, there is the movement beneath him, there is the people that he surrounds himself with. And while I can assure you that I arranged the first summit between President Abbas and President Trump in the White House in May, early May, the 2nd of May, 2017, and I assure you the chemistry was as high as you can imagine. The relationship between the two leaders, the two men, was exemplary. The content of the conversation was extremely promising. All the way to the second meeting we also arranged in Bethlehem soon after, and then in New York a few months later. Everything was almost perfect until that U-turn literally a U-turn, 180 degrees.
And part of that U-turn was kicking you out. Of
Yeah, of course. And why did they do the 180 degrees? It's the people he surrounded himself with. So let's hope this time he's not going to surround himself with people who will give him wrong advice.
Let me end with the organisation you represent. You speak as head of mission for the PLO, effectively representing the Palestinian Authority that runs the West Bank at the moment. Simple question. Why would anybody want to deal with an 89-year-old man, last elected 19 years ago, who's been accused by Amnesty of corruption?
Number one, the government of the state of Palestine is the PLO. It's not the PA. Let's be clear. The entity that represents every Palestinian inside and outside is the PLO. The PLO created the PA, entrusted the PA to do certain responsibilities under our Oslo commitments.
PA, just to remind people, the Palestinian Authority.
The Palestinian Authority, yes. President Abbas was elected by his people. Okay, we should have convened elections every 5 years. There are many reasons, if you have 6 hours, to outline for you why we couldn't, under so many internal, external constraints.
Can I save you 6 hours?
You know,
the reason you don't have elections is because Hamas would win those elections on the West Bank at the moment, according to every opinion poll.
Well, we convened,
so it's undemocratic.
No, but we still convened elections when Hamas did win in 2006, and I'll tell you what's the real reason. 2 reasons. Israel wants to turn our election and democratic process into a process of Israeli colonization. They want to pocket Jerusalem, prevent our people from voting in there, and we will never allow for 350,000 of the people of our capital, occupied capital, to be excluded from the democratic process. And the second reason is the international community, including the UK, that after 2006 elections, when Hamas won, they say, oops, we didn't expect this result. We will lay siege on the government. So the issue is not who is leading the Palestinian people.
Interestingly, President Abbas, only this week, set out a pathway, as it was described, to a post-Abbas future. Now, we neither have the time, and I suspect you haven't got the inclination to go into the detail of all that, but he was suggesting who would succeed him if he wasn't able to rule anymore, and indeed that there would then be elections within 90 days of that succession.
Yes, indeed.
Is this a signal, an important signal, that if we get to what diplomats call the day after this conflict, it won't be President Abbas who's doing this? Someone new will be in charge.
It's a signal that, number one, it's the PLO that is in charge, responsible in Gaza, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, the unity of our territory and our people. And there is one address, there is no other address. And all these dubious ideas of forces, external, of mercenaries are not going to fly, and they will not be accepted. This is the only option. Second, we have our democratic process, so that presidential decree is very important. Only the Palestinian people have the legitimacy to elect. I don't pick, I don't signal or point to a person to be my deputy. Let the people decide. So that's why I started by telling you, let the people decide.
Let me ask you finally about going back. When you let yourself dream, you began this interview by talking about hope rather than optimism. Do you dream that you would be able to take your children there, that your children could one day live in Gaza or the West Bank?
I don't dream, actually. I act, and this is a deep, deep belief in my heart that this is going to happen, and is going to happen in my lifetime. Up until a few years ago, I thought maybe in my children's lifetime, but now, particularly in the last few years, remember the Sheikh Jarrah events 3 years ago. Since then, I started believing seriously that no, it's going to be in my lifetime. And seeing the energy of the international public opinion, seeing your people here, the British people, and I mean, I wake up every single morning, all the way to the evening, and Palestine here is what's the word? I panic, literally, and my wife keep asking me every morning, why do you feel restless? I say, not because of the challenges, because of the opportunities. I don't know where to go and who to tap to and who to address. So things are changing. A few years ago, it was much more difficult for the average person to understand. But now every Brit, every American, every European, every international understands the very raw idea of what is this and where we need to go. So yes, of course, I'm hopeful. That's why I would like to stay outside in the meantime to utilize this moment.
Husam Zomlot, Ambassador Zomlot of the Palestinian state, as you wish it to be known, head of mission of the Palestinian Liberation Organisation here in London. Thank you very much indeed for joining me on Political Thinking.
Thank you, Nick.